It's really lovely to be here. I've worked with Sounddelivery now for several years as online editor at Children and Young People Now. And most of the incredible panellists you're about to hear from today have written really insightful pieces for us about their expertise. You'll soon find out for yourselves how important their voices are to inform political debate, especially as we go into a general election. We're halfway through the campaign today, so it's a really topical time for us to be having these discussions. They're going to be offering insights about vital and often overlooked issues, from young people unable to access mental health support in the countryside, the link between poverty and bullying, and the urgent need for mentoring for children in primary schools. They're also going to be discussing an innovative approach to trauma in childhood. We're in for a really timely and thought-provoking lunch hour. Thank you so much for joining us today. You'll hear a range of perspectives on the crisis facing children and young people. And we're asking, are we failing them? And most importantly, how do we stop that? Where do the solutions lie? In January, I wrote a piece for CYPNow about a major survey by the Children's Charity Coalition. This found that 62% out of 1,000 children don't think politicians understand the issues that are affecting them today. In another recent poll, 18 to 24-year-olds said for them mental health is the most significant issue for this election. Yet they have very little confidence any political party will prioritise this. In the last few weeks, we've seen all three political parties release their election manifestos. The Conservatives have promised a national service for over 18s, which has proved controversial to say the least, and that's something we'll probably be discussing today. The Lib Dems have pledged to put mental health practitioners in every school, and Labour have offered a series of youth hubs and have said they will give 16 and 17-year-olds the vote if they are elected. There is a lot to do for Generation Z and Generation Alpha, whoever wins this next election. We're facing record levels of school absences, with a staggering 1.8 million children regularly missing school. The cost of living crisis has left thousands of families choosing between heating and eating. Research suggests that 1 in 5 young people now have a diagnosable mental health condition. For parents of preschool children, childcare provision and solving that crisis is believed to be likely to influence half of all voters. This is the first time a lot of these things have been at the pinnacle of elections. And on top of that, violent crime is a deep concern for many communities. For me, these are issues I write about every day, and they never fail to shock me. Our children and young people deserve so much better. And on that note, I'm going to introduce our speakers today, who work with vulnerable children and young people all the time. First up, we've got Emma Pears. Emma is the founder and CEO of Selfa Children's Charity, based in North Yorkshire. Selfa supports more than 500 children and young people every year. Emma campaigns for better access to mental health services for children and families in rural communities. And this is rooted in her experience as a parent of a child with mental health needs and emotionally based school avoidance. Siobhan Down is founder and chief executive of Yellow Brick Road Projects, based in Hampshire. She describes herself as an autistic woman, a mother, a leader, and a pirate. Siobhan has lived experience of what we now know as adverse childhood experiences. 10 years ago, she founded the charity to help others with experience of trauma who'd lost hope. Steve Arnott is a hip-hop artist, founder and chief executive of Beats Bus Records, based in Hull. Public speaker, community artivist, and protagonist of the documentary A Northern Soul, which is well worth a watch. And I'm not saying that just because I'm also from Hull. Steve is a community champion award winner and believes arts, culture, hip-hop can benefit children's and young people's development. Beth Thomas is a mentoring scheme manager and safeguarding director at Our Place Support in Birmingham. She helps children and young people with their emotional, mental, and social well-being. She's experienced childhood trauma, mental health issues, including bipolar, and youth homelessness. She sits on the Association of Mental Health Providers Lived Experience Advisory Board and has an MSc in Child and Adolescent Wellbeing. What I'm going to do is I'll pose 3 questions to all of our panellists, and afterwards you'll have the opportunity to ask them your questions. As we go along, if there's something you want to ask or say, please write it in the chat and we'll get to you. We're really, really keen to hear your thoughts. Now it's over to our brilliant panel to hear what they've got to say. So my first question to you, panel, is what are the main issues facing children and young people in your communities today? And Emma, I'm going to go with you first.
Thanks, Fiona. I'd say that the main issues, obviously, as you mentioned, is mental health support. So I carried out some research as part of a health equity fellowship where we are in rural North Yorkshire, and over 75% of the children and young people I spoke to said they aren't getting the help with their mental health that they need. So that is a massive issue, really. I think that we need to really do a deep dive on to look at how we can support not only the prevention of mental health disorders, but also at every stage for children and young people. I'd also say that school avoidance is a massive issue. We're seeing massive numbers of children and young people who aren't at school. It peaked in COVID, but it's still nowhere near pre-COVID levels. And last year, at least I think 22% of children were classified as persistent absentees. And that's something that we see at Self a Children's Charity. We have a specialist programme for children and young people and their families, which is oversubscribed threefold. And that's for children who are really who have school avoidance, emotionally based school avoidance. So, and some young people we're finding are so anxious that it's taken them 2 or 3 weeks into the program to actually get out of the car and come into the session, because they barely leave their bedroom, never mind their house. So those are the two of the key issues that I'm seeing at the moment.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Emma. Siobhan, we're going to come to you next. Can you talk to us about the key issues that you're seeing from children and young people in your community?
Yeah, thank you, Fiona. I would say the same things as Emma. You know, when you say at the end something and what she said, unfortunately, that's what I would say. But I would add to that the real lack of social housing, because what's driving a lot of this is not only the impact of COVID, but poverty. Recently, in Centre Point's big issues last week, said that the cost of private rent compared to a social rent for most families, an average is £828 a month difference, which is taking people around about probably a gap of about £10 between them and not fulfilling any of those basic needs. So really scary. And the fact that so many young people are coming out of school and wanting to leave home. 136,000 young people have approached their local authority in need of housing, and that's in the last year. And that Centre Point's estimate, that's based on an increase from 129 the year before, which because nothing has changed. So housing is a big issue, and that from a mum with a new baby to a young person, these are all very important individuals, and housing really has a big impact on them.
Thank you, that's great. And just a follow-up question there. So we say we're seeing these young people wanting to leave home, and then are they then presenting as homeless? What sort of support are they receiving?
So they're going to their local authority, and depending on their age, under 18s, there is a duty of care, which is children's services, to place them in appropriate settings. But for some young people, we had a young person who came the other day, wants to complete his GCSEs, but the place that he was given was 30 miles away out of his community, and he wanted to come back each day. There was an expectation he'd travel back each day to do that. So there's not even in communities enough spaces for those young people who really can't be at home, whatever reason.
Thanks, Siobhan. That's a really good example. That's really powerful. I'm sure we'll come back to that later on. Thank you. Steve, can you sort of enlighten us on the things that you're seeing in Hull?
The main issues I'm seeing with young people is poverty and stigma and bullying. One of the main reasons we had to create the mobile recording studio at Beach Bus Records was to go into communities to offer our services to young people, because the families don't have the money to give young people to travel to do creative stuff all the time. So, and it just makes me think that comes from the wealth imbalance in the UK, everybody was watching the football last night, like, come on, England, yeah, cheering them. And it just makes you think, like, how can these footballers get paid stupid amounts of money a week when there's still families in the UK that can't afford to feed the children? So the wealth imbalance really needs addressing, I think. And also, it's great to see, youth services being mentioned in the manifesto. But I think unless we actually tackle the root problem of all the reasons why you need these extra youth services, which is poverty, then you just add in plasters to an open wound. You're not actually getting to the root of the problem. I mean, bullying comes up all the time at Beats Bus Records. I remember when I was at school, when I was young, at junior school, and it was a school with uniform, you had to wear a uniform. And I had to turn up to school maybe every 2 weeks with a note saying, sorry, my son isn't in school with his uniform because it's getting washed. So I had my normal clothes and I only had one uniform. That's all my family could afford. And I used to end up actually having to physically fight because I didn't have a uniform on. And now with the uniforms, it's not just that, it's top shoes. It's, the families have pressure to make sure the children look so smart. And if the children don't, then they become the subject of the bullying that then adds to school absences because children live in fear of going to school because they don't want to get bullied. And then the pressure comes back to the parents about the school absences and they end up excluded and they end up having nowhere to turn there. So, yeah, I mean, for me, the heart of everything that needs to be tackled really is poverty and the imbalance of wealth for young people in the UK.
Thanks, Stephen. I'd just like to pick up on, you spoke about the youth services and the importance of youth work. We've seen, and it was on the slides at the beginning of this presentation, there's been a 77% cut in youth services over the last decade or so. What is the provision like in Hull? Is there enough?
No, absolutely, definitely not enough. There is some few provisions, but again, they're all in the town centre. And if families can't afford to give children the money to travel to the town centre, then the children can't access the services. So, that's why we created the mobile recording studio, so we can go into estates and parks and places where children are getting in trouble because they've got nothing better to do. So that's the reason why we like to introduce them to the arts and music industry and try and give them a different choice in life.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Beth, I'm going to come to you sort of last, but by all means not least. Can you talk to us a bit about the things that you're seeing in your community?
Yeah, it's pretty much a summary of what everybody's just said, really. Anxiety is probably our main reason for referral for children and young people that we work with. Relating to that is the emotionally based school avoidance. So again, like Emma was saying, post-COVID, children really struggled going back into the school system. Depending on the reason, those with anxiety, if they didn't like school, they actually really flourished in COVID and lockdowns. And then being forced to go back into school really did have an impact on their emotional well-being. We're seeing things like poverty, as Steve mentioned. One of the areas that we work in is considered an affluent area, so we often don't get funding for that, but that's not to say the need's not there. Often people will come to us when they're at crisis point. We have had instances where kids have taken food from school for the parents because they didn't have any food at home, or teachers are dipping into their own pockets to give parents food and children food and things like that. I've been doing this work now for about 13 years, and when I first started, lots of our referrals were around kind of friendships, low self-esteem, confidence. And over the years now, it's really normal for us to receive referrals from self-harm, suicidal ideation. I think we've had the youngest that we've had that we supported a child through who was experiencing suicidal thoughts was 9. And then younger when it comes to anxiety and things like that. So it's very much the mental health side of things, but also special educational needs. The lack of provision for these children is terrible. And the struggles that parents have to, and carers have to go, guardians have to go through to try and get access to the support that these children, deserve. It's their right to have the support, and it's just not there. So yeah, it's a bit of a summary of what everybody has said.
That's great, thank you. And we've seen in both the Lib Dem and the Labour manifestos, they've pledged to put mental health practitioners in every school. Do you think that would work? Is that something that's happening currently?
it's what's happening currently. And, you know, if you're thinking you've got a school of 1,000 children and one mental health lead in there, you know, and then they have to deal with attendance, other pastoral commitments, there's just not the resources or capacity for these, you know, professionals to do that mental health intervention in school. It's a good start, and you know, by having mental health and well-being talked about within school arena, but there's still so much more things to do. Similarly to when the Labour and Conservatives talk about hubs, we're based in a community hub. We have done for been around for 14 years, and again, people only come to us when they're in crisis. So there'll be discussions around the impact and the effectiveness of the hubs that they're talking about, and what exactly is it that they're providing or aiming to do.
That's great. Thanks so much, Beth. So my second question to the panelists is, we're in the middle of an election campaign. What are we missing from the public debate about what children and young people need? Emma, I'll go back to you for this one first.
Hi, thanks, Fiona. So yeah, I think just picking up on what Beth was saying there about the hubs, you know, we can, you know, whenever we talk about hubs in every community, I'd want to see what that looks like for children who live and go to school in the countryside, because we see, you know, that there too many children aren't getting the help when they need, and it is particularly bad in the countryside. I have families who are expected to travel 80-mile round trips to mental health appointments. So, you know, with the hubs, I'd want a commitment that these are also not just going to be in our towns and cities, but they're also going to be in our smaller communities. Would be really something I'd want to see. But yeah, picking up on what Beth has said there again, just about the crisis in education in our current school system, it really is, you know, with so many children out of school or with poor attendance, you know, it shows that our current school system was not created for the benefit of children, but really to create unquestioning workers. And there are some really small pockets of good. I see some fantastic schools and excellent teacher, but we need to really unpick and redesign what good education is. You know, some Scandinavian schools say it's about discovering your happiness, and I really like that idea. But so many children are really deeply unhappy at school, and that's if they're going at all. And we can't just work on the child. We need to, you know, like quite often we see these programs, even we have one ourselves, you know, where children come out of school and then they're expected to go back into the same environment. So we work really closely with schools at SELFA to support children and young people to go back into school. And we have a 70% success rate with that program, which is really, really heartening. But I also think that, you know, we need schools to look at trauma-informed approach to teaching, which I think Siobhan's the expert on here. So hopefully she'll be able to talk about that, and restorative practice in schools, because we really need to, our children deserve an education, and a lot of our children aren't getting it at the moment.
What I'm wanting to know from you is, in the middle of this election campaign, what are we missing from the public debate about what children and young people need?
So, wow, cast your minds back to Sure Start. If we had a magic wand, we would bring back or really think about those early days of a child's life. The first 1,001 days are the most important days of brain development. And what we're doing is giving babies the first 1,001 days of poverty. Imagine the long-term impact of that experience, not just for the children, but for the parents. And this is why it's so important that we address the issues around housing, particularly around housing for young families, so that they can live stable lives. Such an important thing that happens in that small person's life. Am I allowed to give you an example?
Yeah, that would be brilliant if you could.
Yeah, so we work with many young parents, and you know, for many years we had the teenage pregnancy strategy where we tried to stop teenagers getting pregnant, but really people get pregnant. Let's support people in that. So we run at Yellow Brick Road Projects, we run a young parents group weekly, and what we see is young families, and it's through no fault of their own, living in one room with their whole life, their plans for the next bit of their life, their three-piece suite, their dining table, their television, their cot, everything in one room. And then we ask them to have a great start for that child's life. this needs to change. We need to value those early days in a child's life, and what is missing is that value in this. I think it's a big gap, and if we don't come back to supporting families at this really early stage, where are we going to be? We've already got children in distress now. Will those figures go up? We'll be looking at 1 in 2 children. It's an investment.
Steve, can I go to you for this question? What do you think's missing from the current election campaign debates?
Yeah, sure. What I think's missing is, young people's actual voices, young people's thoughts, and young people's how they want the next years to be, how the next generation wants the years to be. Working with a youth board at Beats Bus Records, we now understand like so many different needs of young people. We work with young people who have ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, to name a few. And there's so many different needs. And this never seems to get, dealt with at a systemic level. It's always the same things. Like I was reading yesterday, and there's some statistics. It says only 1 in 10 young people aged 8 to 17 believe that politicians focus on their needs when making decisions in policies and in politics. So why are young people going to vote if they don't feel that their needs are getting put first? So what I believe is that the government need a youth board within their decisions, and they need to listen to the next generation, and they need to listen to young people when they're planning and they're doing everything that they do. I also believe that the schooling system needs testing. It's never been tested since it's been created, and it needs testing because it fails so many young people. The prison to pipeline statistics are absolutely crazy. Like above 60% of young men who get excluded from school end up in prison sometimes in their lifetime, and there's nothing, again, in place that seems to be dealing with these things. So the schooling system needs flipping on its head, and it needs testing, and that's something that we plan to do with the Hip Hop School of Excellence at Beats Bus Records. It will be aimed at young people that don't fit into the academic system or into these boxes that they're forced to be pushed into and have no grades, or young people that have been excluded from school and they don't have nowhere else to turn to within education. So we plan to try and do something to fill that gap. But yeah, just young people's voices in the planning, in everything that they promise. They make a lot of promises, governments, and we never seem to hear any young people's opinions within them promises.
That's really great, thank you, and really interesting. And that sounds like a great initiative that you're talking about, the Hip Hop School of Excellence. Yeah, and would that be sort of a vocational track for young people, like you said, who are maybe struggling in mainstream school? Yeah, sure. It'd have 3 outcomes, really. So outcome number 1 would be that they would be guided back into education, whether it be college or university. Outcome number 2 would be there'd be a fully fledged artist that could create a career within the music industry. And our outcome number 3 could be that they then become an apprentice within Beats Bus Records, working with young people. That's brilliant. Will those people then be sort of, they can inspire the next generation of young people to come through Beats Bus? Yeah, exactly. And everything we do at Beats Bus, we empower the young people to have full control of it. We're just the guidance. The young people control everything. So we realised as well, we was campaigning with no more knives and no more county lines. And then when the young people did some campaigns, everyone started listening to them rather than us old fogies going on. So having the young people's voices within the campaigns was really powerful as well. And that's something we're focusing on this year. That's great. Thank you so much, Steve. Beth, I'll go to you. What do you think has been missing from this election campaign so far?
Talk about prevention and prevention services. We know, like research-wise, prevention is key, and it has been. We've known this for years. Yet it always seems that the services that can provide prevention support are the ones that get cut. If we're going back to kind of the youth services and the statistics there, I think the one that you showed was 77% over 15 years. Another statistic I pulled off was from 2011/12 and 2021/2022. Funding went from 947 million down to 341 million. And a lot of those services were universal services that got cut, and then the targeted services which were left, are working on a very discounted budget. And we just need to reinvest in that prevention side of things, like youth clubs. There's some areas around us that there's just no youth service at all, and it's like, where do these kids go? What do they do? So there really needs to be, I think, more focus in accessing things like youth services. If there's social clubs on, often they come at a cost, which parents can't afford. So, it's all those kind of things that they really need to look at. Because if we know that mental health issues develop mainly in adolescence, we know that there's 6 to 12 months waiting lists for a young person, child or young person, just to get an assessment, then potentially being told that they don't meet the criteria for intervention. So we really need to go back to basics, really, and look at what is causing those mental health issues. And it is things like lack of school services, lack of play, lack of housing, all of those kind of things. So it's stripping it right back to basics, I think. And yeah, so now, I think it's Steve mentioned about putting on a sticking plaster, and that's what the current manifestos are doing, and they're not addressing the roots of the problem.
That's great. Thank you so much. And you talk about sort of these preventative services, Beth. Do you have any examples of young people that maybe come to you and their mental health is improving because of the access to the services they have?
Yeah, so we do a lot of signposting as part of the work that we do. So we've got a couple of mentoring schemes that we deliver. One that's 16 to 18. Another one is 16 to 25, which is our peer mentoring service. Much like Steve was saying, the young people inform that service, and they're able then, or they try to signpost their mentees to services which they think, or organisations where they can have that sense of identity, that belonging, things to help with their self-esteem. But again, there's a lot of organisations at third sector, so who are trying to provide this support and these resources to young people. But again, they're funding dependent, so they could have 6 months worth of funding, 3 years, and then that will stop, and then it's just a constant catching up and adapting and trying to meet funders' criteria, which is great because we appreciate the money, but sometimes it's not reflective of the children and young people's needs. So there's a lot of dancing around, trying to help support children and young people through those services.
That's great. Thank you so much. And it's really great to hear from yourself and from Steve as well. And, there's a lot of comments in the chat about the importance of youth voice and how can we create services for young people without speaking to them first. It seems like a no-brainer to me.
Can I just add, it's also,
yeah, of course.
We really need to be careful not to use youth voices as just a tick box exercise, which so many organisations, whether it's intentional or non-intentional, do. And it's making sure that we support those children and young people, because many of them will come from backgrounds where they have experienced trauma or poverty and things like that. So we need to make sure that if we do use young people's voices, that we put everything in place to best support their needs.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Beth. If you had 5 minutes with the next Prime Minister, what one thing would you say to help the lives of children and young people?
One thing. It's really tough, isn't it? But I think it would be in 2 things. Invest in prevention and do not leave any child behind. And I think that's really, really important because, if we start as early as possible, and for me, it's about, in a Self for Children charity, it's about including parents and carers in mental health support for children and young people so that they can be part of the solution. I'm not saying they're mental health workers or counsellors, but actually we want to be part of the solution. And, my daughter started to show signs of struggling with her mental health when she was 8 years old. And a lot of what I do now has, stemmed out of the support that I was able to get for her and myself. And she's 18 now, doing really well, just finishing off her A-levels, 2 more to go, and she's got an offer for university. And I don't think any of that would have been possible without early help for her mental health. And, I really feel that on results day, I feel really sorry for the children who didn't make it to, the end of their education. And that's what I really, really want to see. I want to make sure that no child's left behind. We don't actually have a mental health workforce that will meet the need for children and young people. So we need to invest in that. As well, we need to create the workforce. And a really good way of doing that is bringing our young children and young people through who have come through, and training them to be able to support other children and young people. Peer support is fantastic, and we do a lot of that at SELFA. But I think that those are the two main things, and to include the countryside in this, because our children in rural communities do not have access, and we know that Sir Michael Marmot said that children who grow up in poverty in the countryside are actually worse off than children who grow up in poverty in the city, because they don't have any services.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I've just seen a comment pop up in the chat that says something along the lines of, I had to wait 2 years for support from my daughter. What is it, if you could give one piece of advice to people who are pushing for support for their children or children they work with to access support, what would that be?
I think sometimes you've just got to be to fight for that, really, actually. It's really hard to do that. You've got to look after yourself. But actually, there were quite a lot of times I used to go into meetings and into school, and I used to envisage myself putting on this invisible armor and just thinking, I am actually my child deserves to have an education. She was excluded from school sometimes. She deserves to have the support that she needs to thrive. And I know that with the right support, she can do it. And she's proving now that she can. But I think actually it's about, just being able to push for the support that's needed and push for that systemic change that we really, really need. But as a parent, you feel you can't really do that. But, it's about getting help for yourself, because whenever, your child could get mental health support for maybe an hour a week, but you're the one who's going to be with them the rest of the time. You're going to be the one who's with them when they go into crisis most often. So it's about getting that support for yourself and being able to, because parents say to me things like, I'm scared to go up to my child's bedroom and speak to them, because I feel every time I speak to them, I feel like I make things worse. So it's about, getting that support through peer support and parenting programs as well. I know a lot of people are put off by them, even the term parenting programs, but that support for you as a parent to be able to have the right words to say to your child and to be able to support them in the moment, without being, as I said, that counsellor role. But, as parents, we should be able to have the tools, and it's so hard because we've never dealt with anything like this before.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And, best of luck to your daughter in her last exams as well.
Well, my first thing on my list would be, could we provide free, high quality for school meals for every child, not just children that meet a criteria, but every child in this country. Now, it seems a little bit left field to say this, because we can't build houses quick enough, but we can feed people quite instantly. We've proven this in the pandemic. And we have farmers in this country who are, again, in our rural communities on the breadline, because they are not able to sell their products. We could provide a really good pipeline of nutritious food, which would help ease the burden of poverty on families, and make sure that our children have the nutrition they need to grow up to be strong adults. Because what we're doing with poverty is weakening children's physicality and mental health. And these are our leaders for the future. We need to make sure that they have ways and means to become healthy adults. And please commit to building 90,000 houses per year for the next 10 years. Please, Prime Minister, we've got to do this.
That's great, Siobhan, thank you. That's really powerful as well. And on that housing question, why is it so important? Why that number? Why 90,000? Could you elaborate?
So 90,000 is a figure that came out in the Big Issues research into what difference we could make by building more social housing. Social housing, as I spoke about right at the beginning, the rent is the cost of living in social houses compared to the private landlords and private lettings is a difference between a life of food banks and a life where it's sustainable. And we want people to be able to feel pride in their home and where they live. And Steve talks about bullying at school. When you're going to school and you don't have the right shoes because you can't afford the right shoes, this is where things start to break down. But you also go to school worried about how your mum's going to manage because children feel what their parents are going through. So they go to school thinking, well, mum's not got enough food for herself tonight. I've seen her not eat for a few days. I know if somebody offers me to do something, I'll do it. And we see young people pulled into crime, pulled into subsumed by gang culture because they want to provide. They don't want to put their parents under any pressure. So really, poverty is the big issue. And if we can feed those children, we're really going to help. And in this day and age, it's shocking that so many people are having to turn to food banks for their basic needs. So yeah, that's what I'm asking for.
Thank you. I think some really great links there between the poverty, the homelessness, the sort of access to crime, and I think that's a really good opportunity to bring you in, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I wrestled with this one quite a bit. I had a top 10 that I'd hit. But yeah, number one, just following on what from Siobhan said, tackling the wealth imbalance and eradicating poverty, because that will ultimately stop young people going to prison. And what I mean is, for an example, growing up when you have nothing, sometimes you'll do anything to have something. So, you can turn down the wrong paths, you can do the wrong stuff to have something that you've never had. And that is because families and young people grow up in poverty. That's the reason why they never have anything. So I'd say to him, look, Prime Minister, we need you to be honest with us about what the root cause of poverty is. And you need to tackle it instead of adding extra plasters like we've been talking about. So you need to tackle the poverty issue, and then that will help tackle everything else that is an issue. So for another example, we work a lot with the youth justice system at Beats Bus Records, and some of the young people that we work with, I talk to them about, what they do and stuff. And they say to me, like, we earn £2,000 a day. Can you give me £2,000 a day if I'd come and do music with you? And I just said, no, I can't. And I feel like I can't blame them for taking that path because, like I say, when you grow up with nothing, you'll do anything you can to have something. So, yes, my one thing to the Prime Minister would be, please tackle the imbalance of wealth, tackle poverty, try eradicating it, and that'll ultimately stop young people making the wrong choices in life to try and provide for their families, to try and have things that other young people have, but they don't have it themselves because they live in poverty. So eradicate poverty, please, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you. That's really, really powerful there, Steve. That example was shocking, but thanks so much for that. Thank you. And Beth, over to you. What is it that you're asking for?
I'm going to blow the early intervention and prevention horn again because I really do believe in it. For example, at Our Place Support, one of our mentoring services is working with primary schools, and children can get referred to us for all sorts of issues. It could be that they've got a special educational need. It could be that they're struggling with their emotional well-being, family breakdown. There might be risk of exploitation. And having that one-to-one time with a mentor over a number of weeks where we treat each individual child as an individual. Mental health is subjective to the, individual person. I've got bipolar, but I'll be experiencing it different to somebody else who's got bipolar. And if we're going to treat the needs of young people in mental health, we need to be able to take that holistic approach to each individual. So it does help that maybe that there's one mental health lead in a school, but actually if we're going to make long lasting change, that young person will need more than just a drop in at the door for the mental health lead. So if we are looking at kind of addressing the mental health issue, we need to kind of meet that with the needs of the children, that everybody's different. What works for one person isn't going to work for another person. So we need to kind of start thinking about that when we're looking at solutions.
That's brilliant. Thank you. There's a lot of backing for your early intervention in the chat there, Beth. Somebody said timely intervention is so important. And I think it's really interesting as well that both you and Steve and potentially Siobhan as well had brought in that link with exploitation. This happens when these early intervention services aren't in place. Is that something you are seeing a lot more of?
Yeah. I mean, we see it across the services. I myself have got lived experience of sexual exploitation, which is one of the reasons why I got into the roles that I got in, that I do now, is to have that person that I never had when I was younger. And so the unfortunate thing is there's no specific services that work directly with those young people who are at risk of exploitation. We'll have the violence reduction unit who do a lot of work, but there's no kind of specific organisation that can, there's just no funding for it at the moment in Birmingham. So it's very difficult for us as professionals to be able to provide that support for the young people that need it because of things like lack of funding.
That's great, thank you. And thank you for sharing your own experiences there. I think that's really inspiring and really important. Thank you. Right, so I believe it's time for some audience questions. So please keep putting them in the chat. Please keep your comments coming. The first one we've had, this is from Holly, I believe, at UKY4N. How do we fight apathy and disconnection from politics amongst young people? And sort of linked to that, how can we bring them into the conversation to show them that things can change? Steve, I'm going to go to you first on that because you advocated for young people being involved in, the campaigns and the policies.
Yeah, we listen to them. That's how we do it. We listen to what the young people are saying. We take notice of them, and we implement their views and their thoughts within our work. We empower the young people to make them feel like they're important. They have a right to say something. They have, this letting young people vote when they're 16, 17. Young people have brilliant opinions, a lot much younger than 16 and 17 years old. So we need to start thinking about listening to the next generation, empowering them, and including them in social change, because it's going to be them that's living the social change, So they need to have their voices heard and they need to be included.
Thank you. And Siobhan, I noticed you had your hand up. Can I come to you?
Yes, I think it's definitely about trust. And this is where it comes from, is that don't trust what people are saying they're going to do. And I think that often resonates with many young people, feel let down. An example we are doing is some work. We've invited our candidates to come and meet our young parents. Please don't wear a suit. You're going to get down and get in the Play-Doh. And that's where the conversations happen. We work with young people to get them involved with research as well, so that it's not just about politics, but say, look, you can influence change. You can. They're listening to you, and you're the most valuable people here. So it's working out ways to not to go to them, but them to come to us. I believe in that. We build the trust, and they'll come to us. But yeah, no, I also think where's democracy on the national curriculum? Where is it being taught? It maybe because it's the voting age is 18. It seems like there's not enough space for that. But actually, it needs to start young, and it needs to be for everybody, even those, especially those children that are not in school, especially those children.
That's great. Thank you. Emma, I'll come to you in 1 second. Just want to remind everybody in the audience, if you've got a question, you can also pop your hand up and we'll come to you sort of through the microphone. Please pop some questions up for our panel to answer. Emma, what's your view on that?
So for me, it's about systemic change. So, we need to have those systems in place, and they need to be inclusive systems. So like at SELFA, we have a youth board who very much inform the work that we do. But a lot of the children and young people on our youth board would, by their own admission, struggle with some concepts, and that's what they're fed back. So it's about being accessible with that as well. So we don't have a youth parliament that's full of young people who are from quite privileged backgrounds, or have had a lot of opportunity thrown their way. So, I think it's about that, and also we have like that youth voice at every single level. So whether it's you're a young evaluator within our organisation, a young researcher, a reporter, and then pay young people for the work if you value them, pay them for the work that they do as well. So I think those are like some really important things that we can do there.
That's great, thank you. And Beth, I'm going to come to you.
So we delivered a recent evaluation with some of the primary school children that had accessed our group work. and we were talking about what kind of support or what kind of things would they be interested, and they were talking about things like how they want the space to talk about things like money, like disabilities, like the law. You know, a lot of them weren't quite sure what the laws were and what they can and can't do. But there was real passion amongst those children to want to make change to their lives. So I think the passion's there, but like Siobhan said, it's about trust. It could be really hard to build trust with people who just don't trust the system. So by giving that empowerment onto the children and young people, as Steve said, you know, their voices, you know, make such a big difference. And it's kind of just making sure that we support them through that journey as well, and so that they're being put in the right rooms and listened to by the right people who could make change.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Just checking for some more questions. We're having some really great ones coming through now. This one is anonymous, but if it's yours, do give us a wave. It says, I wonder if we could hear more about the main practical opportunities that currently exist to achieve better lives in young people that could be invested in. So, Siobhan, you spoke a lot about, so actually, Emma's got a hand up, then I'll come to you, Siobhan.
Yeah, I saw that go in the chat, and I really wanted to share some of the things, because I think that, like, we're all from community organisations here. We're working in the voluntary sector, and we're usually the people who come up with the solutions. Our communities are the solutions to our own problems. So I think that, you know, a lot of the work we do at, say, from me, I know the other guys have some amazing projects going on, but, you know, I said we have a specialist programme for emotionally based school avoidance for children and young people, and that's like something that we set up long before education. We're doing something around this. We have, you know, youth groups where we look to address childhood obesity for children and young people who are very much disengaged with sport, healthy eating, and the community. So we have some really great examples around that as well. And we work with young adults as well. So they're telling us that, you know, they feel quite lost in that transition between childhood and adulthood. So we have like a programme which is funded by the UK Social Prosperity Fund, which I would be very, very worried about losing, because this is supposed to be what I think Rishi Sunak has mentioned would be funding national service, and that's a bit of a worry for me, because you know, like that money is in communities now, and really, if we are looking to have young people as volunteers, I want young people who want to be there as well, and get to do the opportunities that really make them, you know, thrive.
That's great, thank you. If you could maybe put a link to that programme in the chat so people could learn more, that'd be brilliant. Thank you. And Siobhan, I'm going to go to you.
Oh, well, this is, for me, this is the trauma-informed question. How do we make sure that every service where a young person is met by an adult can trust that adult, and that they have a warm welcome? I recently spoke to Thierry Blundell, who was on Radio 4 with a programme called Excluded, and we spoke about the difference it makes to a child's life when they are warmly welcomed into a place, and the difference it makes if they're not. So when they come through that door, they are the most welcome guest. If we can help all our schools to learn the difference, and our every place a child goes knows how to make them feel welcome. It's quite a basic thing, really, but it makes a huge difference to the way that somebody perceives you, and builds that trust in what you do. And also that wherever possible, that every child has a trusted adult that they can talk to, a trusted adult that may not be in their family, but somebody they can go to, and they know where to go to get that. Because so many of our young people are exploited by people they think they can trust.
That's great, thank you. And what I'm going to do now, we've probably got time for one more question. We've had a really interesting one come through that I think you're all going to be really keen to answer. So this is from Rochelle at Blagrave Trust. What message would you want to leave with charitable funders? How better can funders really stand behind and better support all of the incredible work that you're doing? Beth, I'll go to you first for this one, then I'll come to you, Steve.
Got to put me on the spot. I think flexibility is one. I think we are lucky to have funders where we can be flexible, particularly through COVID. That was essential, that we needed to we literally had to turn the whole service on its head. But sometimes things happen maybe socially, or like there's social changes, and which means we may have to tweak what we do. And we really appreciate it when funders are open and honest with us, and we can be transparent with them about where we are, what we want to do, and just have that support. Really, I think my worst experience as funders is that lack of communication, apart from when they wanted that report at the end of year 1, year 2, year 3, and nothing in between, and no communication in between. So I think having that transparency and flexibility throughout the funding really helpful for us.
Thank you. Right, just quickly, Steve, I'll go to you, and then Siobhan, and then Emma.
Yeah, I answered in the chat anyway. Core funding for the people that are delivering all these projects is really important for sustainability, because the worst thing is for young people to get involved in a project and then the project has to stop because there's no funding to carry it on. So core funding and unreserved funding as well, with a great relationship with the funder. So then you can use it to do the best things that you do.
That's great, really succinct, thank you. Siobhan?
Access to other things other than funding. So money's great and we all need it. There's no doubt about it. But what we also is great is to have access to a mentor for the leader, or a mentor for and people that volunteer. There's a great funder out there. I'm not going to shout their name, but because they may well be here. But one of the things they did for us in our funding was gave us access to so much more than just the money. And that impact has been long lasting. So that is really valuable.
Thank you. And just, a quick point from you, Emma, if you've got one.
Yeah, I would say sign up to IVAR, so that's the Institute for Voluntary Action Research, their trust-based funding principles, because basically if you like what we do and you think that you've done your due diligence, then you should trust us to spend the money where we see best within our communities. But I'll put a link to that in the chat. But yeah, the more funders that can sign up to that, the better that funding is spent within, and it actually reaches the people that it's supposed to, rather than fund hierarchical systems and admin that really doesn't need to be done.
Thanks so much. Gutted we haven't got more time to get more into these brilliant questions that are coming through on the chat, but it's been a really enlightening lunchtime. We've had so much nuance and personal expertise, and I hope you can all see now why these voices and voices like them should be informing the current political climate at such a vital time. Thanks so much again to all our brilliant panelists and for all of you for attending.